Miss Jody coming to you here again with the second video for health. Last video, I explained what we're going to be doing to try to keep up with the journals as we are separated during this time. And so hopefully you're doing well with that and keeping the little note pages that I explained for you to do. Last time we were together, we were starting the topic of the systemic diseases and disorders, and we were talking about these particular diseases and disorders are affecting the entire body rather than just a single organ or a body part. And you could also think of it as the entire system. So we started with cardiovascular disease, and we talked about the troubled areas with cardiovascular disease, and hopefully you have been working on that. I sent you a few videos for the looking at the blockage that can happen and the plaque buildup that you're supposed to watch. And then also we talked about some of the other areas with cardiovascular disease, so a lot of these different areas, if you remember, and then some of the biomedical engineering that can go along with helping with people who experience those particular problems, like the LVAD there system that I sent you a video on. I am going to leave a spot for a picture because I thought, well, if we do ever get back together, we might want to put a picture together here for creating a pump was my original idea. So we do a little hands-on something to see if we could get some good pumping and look at blockages and such. But if we don't get to do that, and if we have limited time when we get back together, maybe if we go on a field trip of any sort that goes along with anything with cardiovascular disease, we could put a picture there. So I'm going to keep that just in case. Now we're moving on to another disease that is going to affect the whole system and of a particular area in the whole body. And so these diseases that we're going to talk about today are dermatopathy. There we go. Any disease of the skin that is going to kind of affect the whole system. So we know the skin world and the dermatology world because we studied that in human anatomy and physiology last year. So we have a couple of the basic ones. Acne. So acne is obviously a common problem. And so we see that's inflammation of the skin's sebaceous glands, which ordinarily produce the sebum to help keep the skin soft and moist. And so we have things like clogs, areas of infection. This would be what we'd see in the acne world. And that can produce blackheads, whiteheads, pimples, cysts. This is formed when clogged pores actually rupture beneath the skin. I guess we need a little extra there. So with the acne, now with some of these, since they're very familiar, I didn't spend a lot of time on because the next topic I wanted to spend a little bit more time on because it's a little harder to understand. All right, so acne. And of course we know in our health book it gives us some things to help us with problems with acne, about cleaning our face and those sorts of things. So you can look at that in your book to remember some of those particular methods for problems with acne. The next one, athlete's foot. So athlete's foot, it's when the feet become infected by a yeast fungus. And those of you that have been in biology 1 know that the fungus world is very interesting because it can be wonderful and when it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, like part of the decomposition side of things most of the time. But fungus can also become a real problem when it comes to becoming pathogenic, or guess what I should say, when it becomes troubling to us and begins to want to be a part of our lives sometimes. So we do have natural yeast that's part of our microbiome that lives on our skin, but we can get an area that's kind of out of balance. And if this happens, you get inflamed areas of your toes and your feet and all that, itching, blisters, raw patches, scratching. As you scratch the fungus, then it may spread the fungus. And so it's kind of hard. And we've talked about this before about, especially when we were in the time with infectious disease and pathogens, and we talked about fungus being a little hard to fight because fungi is made of eukaryotic cells like our own cells, where bacteria and archaea, they're going to be made of the prokaryotic cell. And so when you're going to try to kill that that type of cell, it's not going to kill your cell. And so, but when you get a organism that's similar to your type of cell, sometimes the processes of trying to get rid of it are a little hard because we have similar cells, and you want to kill off those that are causing the trouble, not your own particular good ones. So like anything, it's difficult when we deal with something that's out of balance. Our bodies usually have a way of keeping it in balance, but if it does get out of balance, then sometimes we have to have some intervention. The next one, dandruff, that's a common thing. Skin cells of the scalp multiply too rapidly, causing itching and flaking. And sometimes we think of dandruff as just dry skin, and it feels like it's dry skin, and actually if you put some lotion on dandruff areas, it does kind of soothe it. So sometimes it's a misconception that it's just a dry, crackety time, but many times it's really about a yeast fungus. It's most common, and it's a mild infection by a yeast fungus, and it's a yeast fungus that's normally on your skin in your microbiome. Malassezia globosa is one of the particular ones that can cause some trouble. And as long as it's mild, they have different, anti-dandruff shampoos and stuff that can help you with that. But sometimes it does cause severe problems and very big flaking off and patches of skin as the cells continue to multiply to replace the ones that are being damaged. And then the warts. Now I was running out of room here, and I didn't want to do a whole nother page because this was the end of this main topic. So I just kind of gave you a little to-dos. And who wants to really talk about warts? Really? So it's going to be a two-liner. Warts, and you'll see more in your book, but skin cells infected by a virus. And this particular virus many times is the human papillomavirus virus, HPV, you've heard of before. It's in that particular family. And so warts, little areas of the skin can get nicked and cut, and then the virus can get inside and create the warts, and then it creates, or can get into the skin, and then the skin creates like an overgrowth. And so in that particular area with warts, there's some things that you can do, and I think our book talks about some of the paths of trying to get rid of the warts, where you can actually, in severe cases, have the patient, go to a doctor, and then there is different types of methods to either like burn them off, I guess you would say, or we see things like the acid that you can put on them over the counter. If not treated, warts sometimes can actually even disappear on their own in a couple of years. So, but they're a nuisance, so a lot of people don't like to have warts. So then our next topic is the endocrinopathy, which is going to be some of these systemic disease and disorders of the endocrine glands, malfunctions of that particular system. And I know when we study human anatomy physiology, a lot of you loved this system, the endocrine system, because of how much it works in relation to the neurology, the nervous system, and trying to get everything balanced, all the messages sent where they needed to be sent. And of course, this is the area of the hormone studies, the hormone world that we are so dependent on. And so we have to realize that this system is going to have a lot of function in our body. So therefore, if it becomes, if parts of it malfunction, you're going to have some problems. So they give us a couple things to focus on, and then they focus on the diabetes mellitus, which I thought would be a good one for us to focus on because that's kind of harder to understand. And it's good for us to understand these concepts because broadening our understanding of health as a whole, so that we can just live our lives in the most healthy manner and be aware of these things that can go wrong. All right, but before we get to the diabetes, a couple things as an example of this particular system going wrong. Like let's say, for instance, you have a malfunctioning pituitary gland. So what could that cause? Well, it could cause giantism, dwarfism, acromegaly. My pronunciations are terrible. But with giantism, I just wrote a couple things, and you'll see more in the book, but just so our notes aren't too long. But this would be increased growth in height in the development of the regular developmental pattern of children and adults. Dwarfism would be decreased growth in low stature. And so if the pituitary gland is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, then you could have one of these or two of these problems. Also, this one, acromegaly, I think I'm saying it right, but it's when the bones of the head, the hands, and the feet become enlarged. So you have like abnormal proportions between of your head and your hands and your feet due to a malfunction in pituitary gland. And each one of these you could look up individually to get some more information on. The next example they give is malfunctioning of the thyroid gland. And so they give us two here, the cretinism or the hypothyroidism. And so cretinism is stunted growth, which causes mental retardation, learning disorders, and all that. They say this kind of needs to be diagnosed between 10 to 13 days because old of the baby, because this is malfunctioning the actual growth. So if you can fix it before it's too late, then the child has a better chance. Thyroid glands, in this hypothyroidism, thyroid glands, it's supposed to say does not produce enough thyroid hormone. Let me fix that there. And does not. And it messes up when this hormone is not produced and not used the way that it needs to be. It's going to mess up things like your heart rate, your metabolism, your body temperature. You've heard of this before because a lot of people struggle with malfunction of the thyroid, and they'll have a whole bunch of problems that are because of that particular malfunctioning. Then the diabetes, and this is what I thought would be really neat for us to understand because one, it's hard, and that way we're getting a little dose of diving in a little deeper, but then because we as a country struggle with diabetes, specifically the type 2 diabetes, which will have you divide and understand a little bit more in the diagrams here in a second. I'll explain that. Let's just get an underlining idea of this diabetic world. Okay, so it's really diabetes mellitus, and if you've ever studied this before, the doctors are always like, it's not just diabetes, it's diabetes mellitus. Okay, but we always call it diabetes, DM. It is the inability of the body to produce enough insulin to properly regulate blood sugar. And so it's a blood sugar issue in our bodies, and you'll see on the video that I send you, it's kind of like insulin is a lock and key. It's helping the, you really have to have it in order for the sugar to be able to do what it needs to do. So here's a couple problems that can happen. Ketoacidosis, you've probably heard of this before, or diabetic ketoacidosis. This is where we have severe lack of insulin, and what it does is, and this is all in the figuring out diabetes and things that you can happen with diabetes. And like I said on the diagram, next we're going to actually, I'm going to actually have you separate diabetes type 1 and type 2 using a video to kind of help you understand it more. But this problem can be very severe. So lacking the severe lack of insulin, it will prevent the body cells from taking in sugar. Now, why this is problematic is you still have to stay alive. Your body needs that energy, and so it has to burn something, and it burns fat. And that sounds like a great thing because you're like, wow, I need something to burn my fat. But the problem is we studied, remember when we were looking at the brain and how much of the carbohydrates the brain uses just to keep functioning because it's this massive computer and it's constantly needing fuel. The body isn't built to run on just fat. And so if you're burning fat, it sounds good, but there's byproducts of burning just fat. So very acidic byproducts as it's breaking down, and these are called ketones. And so what happens is you get this built up in your blood and other parts, and it becomes what we call diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, and really problematic for our bodies because we weren't made to just burn the fat. And we remember how important back from, I don't know, what chapter are we on, but when we studied all the carbohydrates, the lipids, the fats, and how important the diet is to our bodies because of how many processes need all these different things. So you can probably really understand this problem. Hyperglycemia. So this is when you have untreated I should say when you have untreated diabetes mellitus. It can cause blood sugars to rise to high levels. And when it rises to high levels, your body is not supposed to be at that level, and you start to see some symptoms. And this will help you understand if possibly you are having trouble with this. This is untreated, you might not even know, and you can go along for lots of years untreated. They say sometimes like 10 years before you even know you had it all along. And that would be the less severe case of diabetes you'll see in the video. But what you would see is excessive thirst, frequent urination, blurred vision, headaches. And we see this a lot with animals that are pets, especially like guinea pigs. Them eating that particular diet that's probably not the best food source because we've created it. I see a lot, especially with caring with the guinea pigs here. They do and my dogs back in the day when I had dogs, they did tend to die in a process that seemed to be similar to having trouble with blood sugar levels, because they were all, and towards the end they would get excessively thirsty, frequent urination, their eyes. My one dog had some really blurred vision. And I think looking back, maybe there was some diabetes going on there because of this. And we've seen that with the guinea pigs. So hyperglycemia. So this is hypoglycemia. So this was hyper and this is hypo. Hypo, just so we can remember, is less than, beneath, or below, where this hyper would be above. So hypo, less than, and this is when you have too low blood sugar. So this one's high blood sugar, and this one you have too low. And this would be in between long periods of meals and such, getting too low. And this can cause impaired function of cells, specifically the brain cells, and that really correlates with what we talked about before with how the carbohydrates and the sugars are very important to the brain's ability to function. And so the impaired function of the cells deprive them of fuel, and so you have problems with too much or too little. And then of course is the problems with barely any, and that creating the really problematic of the diabetes, ketoacidosis. All right, so that brings us into the diabetes world. And what I wanted to do with the diabetes world is I wanted us to kind of understand it a little more. So I'm sending you a PDF of one page that has this on one side of it and this on the other side. And this is going to be for you to use with a video that I'm going to send you on understanding diabetes. There's a diagram that just shows you sort of how it works in correlation with the digestive system and the liver and all the things working together. And you can just kind of take notes around the outside of it, color your little doodads like I love, so it looks good for our journal when we return. And then this page is for you to separate the two, the type 1 and the type 2 diabetes, that they'll break down after they give you the idea of diabetes as a whole. And then you can get some information on that. And of course you can study other things about type 1 and type 2. There's so much good stuff out there, and that'll give you a better understanding. So that will take the lesson a little bit farther. Okay, so I'm going to be sending that over. So those two particular topics of the problems going wrong with the skin world, the dermatopathy, and then things going wrong with the endocrinopathy, the endocrine system. Okay, and then we'll continue on to the next topic. What does it go on to next? Oh, then we're going to start seeing problems with the gastrointestinal diseases and disorders, because those are going to be big ones too. And we see a lot of things with that. And then we also have blood disorders and immune deficiency and lymphatic disorders. And then musculoskeletal diseases, nervous system diseases and disorders. And let's see, disorders with the lungs and the breathing side of things, disorders with the kidneys. And that's pretty much it for that particular topic in Chapter 6. And then to end Chapter 6, we'll have personal health care and practices to be healthy. And that's pretty much it. So once we get through a lot of these particular diseases that are systemic, then we'll be done with Chapter 6 and be able to move on. Okay.